All right, so today we're going to take a look at using what we call the AC method, or splitting the middle term, to solve to factor quadratic expressions that do not have a leading coefficient of 1. Because if it's positive 1, then we can just go back and use that two-part question that we did for section 4.3, which is, what are the two factors that multiply together to give you your constant, but add together to give you the coefficient of your second term. So it's a really quick way to do it. But say we're taking a look at something like this, where it's 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. That's a 5 there. There we go. So the AC method here is taking the place of what the book does, which is a guess and check method here. But today we're just going to look at the AC method. So what we're going to do here is, to get started, first of all, always before you get started with any quadratic in terms of factoring, look to see if there's any common factors that you can take out right at the beginning, because sometimes that makes it into a much easier question. In this case, they don't have anything in common, so I'm just going to go ahead and multiply the leading coefficient times the constant, which is going to give us -6. So now the question becomes, what are the factors of -6 that add together to give us +3? Right? So in this case, that's just going to be +6 and -1. And if you don't see that right away, that's okay. Write out a couple of pairs of factors and see if you can find it that way. It doesn't have to be a mental math, on the first try. So I'm going to drop the first and the third terms down exactly as they are. Now, for this thing, there's a couple different ways to deal with this, but I'm going to go ahead and put the 6 with an x attached to it, and then the -1 with an x attached to it in between those. Notice that we haven't done anything to really change the values of this expression, right? If I combine those two new terms that I put on there, it just becomes the positive 5x, which is what we started with, so we're good there. So we haven't actually changed anything. This is an equal sign there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to group the first two terms together, and ungroup the second two terms together. This does change the problem, because now this is multiplication. We don't want to change it, so I'm going to put a plus symbol in between those. So I don't want to change this thing up. Okay. So my next question is, what do the first two terms in the set of parentheses there, the first set of parentheses, have in common in terms of a common factor? Well, they both have a 2 and an x in common. So remember, you got to look for variables too. So if I take a 2x from the first term, I'm left with x. If I take a 2x out of 6x, I'm just left with 3, plus 3 that is. So remember, we haven't done anything, we just factored that out. So if you were to redistribute the 2x back into the set of parentheses, it should be the same thing we started with. Okay. Now, on the next one here, if I go through and I look and say, okay, well, they both have a 1 in. Well, if I take out a 1 from both of those, I'm left with -x minus 3. And really what we're looking for the AC method to know if we've done this right, or perhaps if it's factorable, is that these two factors in the parentheses need to be the same. Obviously, they're not here. So either it can't be factored, or I can do something else, or maybe I made a mistake. But for this thing, I can look. The only thing that's different about those two starred factors right there is that the signs of the second one are both negative, when in the first one they're both positive. So I can fix this by going back to the previous step, and instead of pulling out a +1, what if I pulled out a -1? I'd be left with an x plus 3. Remember, we could check that again by redistributing, but those two factors are the same, so I know I've done this correctly and that it's factorable. So looking at this a term, and this term over here, you'd ask, what do they have in common? Well, they have an x plus 3 in common. So if I pull out an x plus 3 from that first term, I'm left over with that 2x. And for the second one, if I pull out an x plus 3, I'm left with a -1. Okay? And this thing is now factored. So it seems like a long process, but the more practice we get with this, the faster it's going to be. And it's a nice way to get through it without having to deal with guess and check and the possibility of having to sit there for a while trying to make things work out. Okay? All right, I hope this helped, and good luck.